have you here, Laura Buchwald. We get to talk about your newest book, The Book of Reservations, which actually, on a side note, The Coat Check Girl, which is book number 1 of the series, was named a finalist in the Best General Fiction category of American Bookfest Awards. How did it feel to see the book recognized on a national level?
It felt amazing. You know, you enter these things and then kind of put them out of your mind, because I think the sheer volume of submissions that these types of organizations get, it's just, for me, it's just better to put it out of my mind. I had a writing mentor once say to me, you have a better shot at winning something if you enter than if you don't. And that's kind of because, stayed with me as a mantra. And I enter a lot of things and sometimes it pays off. And so, yeah, I'm really quite pleased about that.
Tell us about when you first started writing. What sparked your desire to tell your stories, particularly ones that blend emotion, realism, and the supernatural, which is really cool.
So I've been writing fiction pretty much since I could write. Yeah, I've unearthed some of my very early stories, and they have potential, but it's been fun to read through some of those. I was a voracious reader as a kid and loved storytelling. I had an active imagination, an imaginary family of bears that lived down the street and a witch that lived in my backyard. And once I learned how to spell and how to write, I started writing my stories down. So it started quite early. This book also started quite early. I actually wrote the beginning of it back in 2007, I think. Worked on it a bit and then put it aside for well over a decade. And it just it stayed with me through that, which is what prompted me to pick it back up. And then in terms of this, I'm very interested in human emotion and connection. And I know we'll probably discuss this more at length in a little bit, but I have a long held belief in an afterlife. And so it was natural that would work its way into my storytelling.
Yeah, honestly, that was my next question, because even you talking about growing up and having these imaginary friends and these beliefs of trying to storytell yourself when you were younger, I can kind of see how that's even just putting together this mediumship that you explore within your books. Mm-hmm. Tell us a little bit about that and how, that's where that inspiration comes from, and more about that belief.
My sister and I firmly believe that the house we grew up in is haunted. My mother denies this. I don't think we ever floated that by my dad, but we believe that. We both had strange experiences as kids. There were certain parts of the house that you just got a creepy feeling when you walked into them, particularly the basement and the attic. And I was raised without a religion. I don't know if that plays into this or not, but I find a belief, not in a haunted house that I grew up in, but I find a belief in the afterlife quite comforting. And I've had some uncanny experiences over the years. And then I went to my first medium in around 2004. And this was the days before social media, before everything I've ever thought could be found via Google. And the things that this man said, the specificity of the messages that came through it would be really hard to be skeptical. It was stuff that there is no way you could trace any of this to me. And the names and the circumstances around people passing and the connecting names, it was phenomenal. And I've seen this guy in recent years as well, and he is the real deal. I do know there are a lot of charlatans out there, as there are in most fields, but there are some really good and really convincing mediums. And I've been fortunate enough to work with some of them over the years. So I'm growing up without a religion. I had no kind of built-in belief system about what happens after. And I don't know that I have a strongly defined belief system, but I do believe that energy is forever and that there is something and that our loved ones are never truly gone. And I find that all very comforting.
That actually kind of leads into one of the questions I wanted to talk to you about, because you're talking about when people are gone. Obviously, the next question we ask or ask ourselves is, how do I deal with this grief?
Mm-hmm.
And grief plays such a defining role in The Coat Check Girl. So how did you approach writing Josie's healing process in a way that felt honest but still hopeful?
She's mourning the loss of her grandmother, who is her closest friend. And her grief there is very pure and uncomplicated, as you know, grief can be. Her grandmother lived a long, rich life. They had a beautiful relationship with no regrets. And she, as far as Josie knows, seemed to have died a peaceful death. And I think her kind of coming to terms with her abilities helped to ease some of that. She's all about making connections with other people. And, grief is this incredibly universal human experience, animal experience, really. And so as much as difficult as it is, obviously, and as heart-wrenching and traumatic as it can be, it connects us on these really profound levels. And I think that's part of her healing process, is connecting with people in the aftermath. And that's been for me, when I've had experiences of grief, it's the connecting with others that has really, the connecting with others and the belief that have really helped. So I guess her experience mirrors mine a bit.
The restaurant settings in your books were in New York City, New Orleans, where they add like a very rich and atmospheric type backdrop. What drew you to these cities, and how do they shape the narrative?
Well, I'm from New York City, so that's a natural backdrop for me. The restaurant that, is the main set, if you will, for, the novel, and then the second novel is a real place, is based on a real place. And this is where I conceived of this book way back in 2006 or 7. It was a restaurant downtown, where I spent a lot of time. I got to know the staff, and I got to really realize how they operated as a dysfunctional family who, even if you can't stand somebody, you've got their back, and you're part of this family. And that's evidenced by, the family meal that is served pre-dinner service. At the same time, I started getting a feeling that there was a ghostly presence in this restaurant. I had the same feelings I had in my childhood home. And I kind of half jokingly asked the bartender if the place was haunted. And he said, yeah, a lot of people say that it is. It's a very old building. And so New York and New Orleans have a lot of history. And with history, if you believe this sort of thing, comes energy that has passed a long time ago. New Orleans is a place that I love and have spent a lot of time. And it was just, everyone in New Orleans has a ghost story. Most of the restaurants are haunted, if you believe what people say down there. And it's a city that embraces the dead in a way that I've never witnessed or heard of anywhere else. They have these second line parades that, when somebody passes, they, jazz funerals, they really, and the cemeteries, there are these beautiful above ground, like, cities. It's a really interesting place. It's a really magical place. And you feel the energy there. I mean, there's a lot of dark history, of course. So you feel the energy, positive and not so positive. But I think both cities are conducive to a story like this because of their history. Also, restaurants, there are certain places, and I say all of this with a grain of salt, but there are certain places that are reputed to have more spiritual energy than or spiritual activity. Restaurants, theaters, hotels. These are all places that a lot of people have passed through the doors, for at least hotels and restaurants, for a lot of different reasons, a lot of emotion, a lot of emotional experience. Really, the entire gamut of human emotional experience can be found in a restaurant on any given night. There are people breaking up, there are people getting engaged, there are people celebrating birthdays, catching up with old friends, having business meetings, whatever it is. So they say that places where there is a lot of human activity and a lot of energy are draws for the spirit world. So restaurants just seemed, for one thing, it was inspired by a real place, but they just seem like good set pieces for a story like this.
So you've been talking a lot about energy and mediums and then also, restaurants and hotels and theaters. So I'm actually really interested. Do you have a background in like the restaurant business or anything like that? Or is it just because you felt the energy?
I feel the energy. I love restaurants. I'm not a great cook. And I've spent a lot of time in them. And the restaurant that is the basis for this book is my favorite kind of restaurant. It's, a casual but nice, very neighborhoody, comfortable, familial place where the staff knows the customers and the customers know the staff. And I just find the whole ecosystem inherent in a restaurant really interesting. Everybody has, there are so many different jobs, and there's this choreography that has to take place every night where, the average customer doesn't necessarily think about all the behind the scenes, but there is so much that has to go into making that meal a decent meal and a decent experience for a customer. And you have a group of people bonded by this one work experience, but from such a variety of backgrounds. And at least in New York, that was another thing that drew me in terms of storytelling to the restaurant that I based it on. Most of the people had come to New York to do different things, to be an actor, to get into fashion, to do, any of the myriad things people come to New York to do, taken these temporary jobs and then stayed long past what they thought was their expiration date there, and just kind of fallen into this familial environment that can be very satisfying and comforting and hard to leave. So I was interested in that side of the people who are drawn to jobs in hospitality as well.
So you had previously mentioned that, the origination of the ghost table kind of came from those feelings that you had in your childhood home. How has that evolved across the series?
The ghost table itself, I was thinking about this earlier. I think my first introduction to the concept, not of the restaurant table, but of the ghost seat, was actually shortly after 9/11. I was in New York. I had a friend who was a part-time musician who unfortunately worked in one of the towers. And that Christmas, there was a holiday party and his band played an acoustic set sitting down, and they set up a chair in his honor. He played the bass. There was a chair and a bass just sitting there, without him there to occupy it. That image has stayed with me and has kind of worked its way into my creativity over the years. And then in around 2010 or so, I was in New Orleans on one of my visits there, and a friend invited me to Murals of Jackson Square, which there's a fictitious version of in The Coat Check Girl. And they set a table every night for their resident ghost, Antoine. There's a table set, actually Antoine and a guest. There's a little sign that says Antoine and guest. And they have, glasses of wine and glasses of water and a bread basket and their plate set every night. And it's sort of a given. I've talked to staff at Muriel's and everyone has a story about Antoine. He's a mischief maker and is very much, a presence there. Again, if you buy into this sort of thing. In terms of how it changes in the books, it's not really in the first book until the very end. In the second book, it becomes a place where Josie can actually interact with some of her departed loved ones. So it very much functions as she envisioned it. And In the third book, she's temporarily without this ability. So the table is still there. It's a sanctuary for her. It's where she goes to meditate and to still talk to her departed loved ones, though now she has no, evidence that they're hearing or responding or whatever it is. She just has to go with her beliefs and her faith. And it's where she goes to meditate on wanting to get that power back, that ability back. So it has a different role, a different but very related role in the third book that I'm currently writing.
So in the Book of Reservations, and maybe speak to it in The Coat Check Girl as well, but you're talking about, the ghost table, and she has to set the table for the ghosts. And anyway, so she has to navigate demands from both the living and the dead. Mm-hmm. So how, as you were writing these books and creating these characters, how did you balance the workplace drama, the personal strain, and supernatural tension in this? Well, not necessarily in just the Book of Reservations, but also in The Coat Check Girl.
Actually, that is sort of Josie's central conflict, is how she's going to balance all of those things. Mm-hmm. She has her abilities are very strong in that book. And her partner is a very scientifically minded, pragmatic person who that concept is anathema to him. He wants nothing to do with her ghost table or her beliefs and her spirit friends. And at the same time, she's guided to some fairly important decisions, both at work and at home, by the spirit world. So she has to figure, she's in this gray area of trying to influence things in the living world with help from the spirit world, without letting her partner or the people in her life know that that's where she's getting this guidance from. And she's dealing with the very tangible and very real stressors of running a restaurant in Manhattan or anywhere really. So she is somebody who kind of navigates life thinking, who can I help? Who needs my help? Who needs me? And so here she's caught between pulling from the spirit, helping the spirit world, helping those in spirit who seek her out for various reasons, and in turn trying to help the living through these messages that she can't necessarily relay directly. She has to, it's a real balancing act for her to figure out, who is open to this, who is not open to this. And some of the key people in her life are not open to it. So that's where her conflict comes in. And I know, as somebody who believes, and I have a lot of skeptics in my life. I have a lot of believers, but I have a lot of really committed skeptics who, despite any evidence from, or anecdotal evidence from mediums or any signs that might be, or things that might be construed as signs from beyond, they will chalk it all up to coincidence. And, I respect that. I respect, I take it all with a grain of salt. It's sort of a hopeful thing for me. And I've had, some experiences that suggest it's more than that, but I don't know. So, I can relate to her wanting to help people with these messages from beyond, and also realizing not everybody wants to be helped with things like that.
So Josie often bridges, has that bridge between living and lost. How does she explore, or what are the emotional costs of her role?
Her kryptonite is not being able to help people, or seeing people in pain, or seeing people who feel alone in this world. And that's sort of my kryptonite as well. So knowing that she's not a medium, so she can't reach out to everybody who who the living might want to contact. The living in her life might want to contact. She can't do that. She has no control over who comes through to her. And So at the same time, she has no control over whether the people who come through have messages for people who would be receptive to them or not. So I think there's some frustration, some sadness when she can't bridge that gap. You know, again, there's the comfort, but she also approaches it with some awe. You know, she doesn't take her ability at all for granted. She's blown away by it every time, even when it's happening quite a bit. And you know, I think the biggest emotional hurdle for her is that not everybody wants to hear what she has to say. And she has these, what to her are extremely important messages from the other side. And she knows beyond doubt that if the people in her life could hear this, they would be comforted. And in some cases, you know, it would be a step toward healing what needs to be healed. And she can only do so much. I think there's some disappointment there and some frustration and hope, a lot of hope that, you know, this isn't all in vain and that she will be able to bridge these gaps.
I love that, because I think that can be applicable to everything in life. You know, like a pastor or a preacher trying to send out their message, or an author, like heaven forbid, like we try to put something beautiful out in the world.
Yeah.
You just read it. Well, speaking of like balancing things, so she has a manipulative manager and a mysterious sous chef, and they tend to raise the stakes a little bit in book 2. So tell us how and why you crafted these characters to complicate Josie's already complicated world.
The mysterious sous chef is part of her spiritual world, and the manipulative manager is part of her very earthbound, very pragmatic and frustrating restaurant owning world. And you know, without giving, it's hard to talk about without giving anything away, but you know, the very thing this manipulative manager does to try to be manipulative, her kind of final act, ends up working completely in Josie's favor, and that was never her intention. So there's some irony there. And then, you know, the sous chef, who clearly is in pain and has something, this speaks right to Josie's need to help people and her frustration when she doesn't fully understand what needs helping or healing. And for most of the book, she just has to accept that she can't crack this guy open and, you know, really figure out what's going on there, because he's very he's a closed book and she is not. And so it's really hard for her, because here's somebody who she sees on a near daily basis, who she knows needs something and needs something that maybe she could provide or could help get answers to. And she just has to sit with the uncertainty of what that is. And she has to sit with the idea that, you know, maybe just knowing someone needs a kind word or a little extra attention is enough, without fully understanding the specifics of what they're going through. And that's challenging for her.
I think that would be challenging for everyone, honestly.
Yeah.
You just have to sit with it. Yeah, I really like that statement.
Which also, once again, is very relatable. You know, I feel like there's a lot of very relatable themes that, you know, readers can connect with, which is honestly, as a reader, that's what I'm looking for, right? I'm looking for a book that I feel connected to, that I can escape to a different world for a minute and, you know, have those experiences. So as the trilogy is moving, you know, to its final installment, what can you share about the themes or emotional arcs that you're excited to explore?
Well, it's sluggishly moving toward its final installment, but we'll get there. So book 1 is really about Josie coming to terms with the fact that she has this ability. I mean, that's reductive, but that's part of it, where the theme of the spiritual ability is concerned. In book 1, she has to come to terms with it. In book 2, she fully embraces it, but has to figure out how to incorporate it into her life in a way that isn't too heavy-handed, where the skeptics in her life, and it's not even necessarily skeptics, people who just don't want to even think about that world are concerned. And then in book 3, like I said, she's temporarily without this ability. So her real lesson there is, how can I feel whole without this thing? It's like losing one of one's senses. It just happens to be a sixth sense for her. But, she has to figure out what her purpose in life is. Because in book 2, she decides her purpose in life, and it seems to be her purpose in life is to bridge that gap, bridge those worlds. And so now what? Who is she without this? Book 3 also, she has a reconciliation with her mother, who has been a prickly character throughout. And she learns the truth about something that she has believed since childhood. And that makes her question a lot about her life thus far. So it's, book 3 is about her having new information and a new way of navigating the world and trying to figure out how she fits into this and who she is with these 2 very important pieces of information.
So beyond these books, do you have any future projects you're thinking about, ideas you're eager to pursue?
Yeah, actually, I have one that I've started several, but I have one that I started before Ronan Weatherford came into my life that I'm excited to get back to. It's totally different, though I did accidentally write a ghost into one scene, but I think I'm going to take her out. But it's about a mother and her adolescent daughter, and there's some trauma at home. The mother whisks her adolescent daughter against her will off to Paris for a couple of weeks. And it's more humorous than that sounds, but it's really about the dynamics of this mother, difficult adolescent daughter, what their dynamic is and what their relationship is, and how it's a dual narrative at this point, how they each process the same experiences. And it's about really the stories that we tell ourselves that may or may not be true. And, what we decide who we are, and we kind of run with that until something shakes up that belief about who we are. So I'm excited to get back to that. And also I'm excited to travel in my mind to Paris and spend some time there. So yeah, that's next.
I would like to go with you.
Okay. We'll make it happen.
Where can readers find you?
Readers can find me. I have a website, which is my name, laurabuchwald.com. I have a Facebook author page for those of us who are on Facebook. And I have a podcast called People Who Do Things, it's a partner and me, and it's conversations about creativity and the creative process. We've interviewed a lot of writers of all different sorts, musicians, who write their own music, playwrights, journalists, TV writers, and novelists. And then we have a lot of episodes that are just the 2 of us just talking about a different aspect of the writing and creative process. Facebook, I'm on Instagram. I have a TikTok account, but it's not very robust. So really, I mean, the one that I use most, which I think is a Gen X thing, is Facebook. So I have my author page that has updates. And then I have a newsletter that one can sign up through my website. And I send very sparingly just updates now and then.